Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Let's talk about some wolves. It is our pleasure to welcome a friend of Wolf Connections. He's been the host of Animal Planet's Extinct or Alive for about 6 years. He's a conservationist and just a wonderful human being with all the work that he does around the globe to help wildlife and species that need this attention brought to them. Forrest Galante, thank you so much for joining us via Zoom.
Yes, sir.
And taking the time out, man.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure connecting with you guys.
Yeah, we were talking just before we started, and I was, we were just discussing a couple things. I went to your page just to look at your bio to get some information. And man, you started this biological wildlife journey from a very, very young age. I want to get some background on this because you were born here in the States, and then I believe at 3 months old, you moved to Zimbabwe in Africa. So just tell everybody about how that started and what was the reason for the move and how that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been inundated with wildlife my entire life. So my family is Zimbabwean. I'm actually sixth generation Zimbabwean. So my family's been in Zimbabwe a very, very long time, since it was Rhodesia and then some. But my dad was an American. So my family came over here. They had me, they had my sister, and then we moved back to Zimbabwe basically straight away so that I could grow up in Zimbabwe but have an American passport as my dad wanted, which was a very smart move on his part because, I wouldn't be where I am today otherwise. I grew up in the bush of Zimbabwe, lived on a big farm growing up. If I wasn't on the farm or in school, I was on safari because my family ran a safari business. So I literally just inundated with wildlife in every aspect of my life, from where I lived to what the family business was, to even going to school in Zimbabwe has wildlife associated with it. So I've just been obsessed with it. And, not everybody is. Like, my sister grew out of it, right? Like, she works in the fashion and makeup industry now. But I've just stayed on the straight and narrow, so to speak, and just have never not been obsessed with animals.
What kind of animals were you seeing on a daily basis there?
Oh, well, we had a big farm, and on the farm we had all your standard stuff. We had cows and sheep and chickens and goats and things like that. But a farm in Zimbabwe, it doesn't just have turkey and white-tailed deer like we have here in North America. So, we'd get leopard incursions. We had baboons. We had vervet monkeys. I had one growing up. When we were plowing the fields, when I was a little boy, one day we came across an abandoned vervet monkey that became like my best friend Chippy, and he used to sleep in the mosquito net above my bed like a bunk bed. Serval cats that would roam around the house that we rescued, blue duiker, tiny little antelope, and the list goes on and on and on. It's just like you'd imagine a farm here in the middle of, say, Texas or something, and look at all the deer, look at all the turkeys, look at the black bears. It's like that in Africa, except with a lot more species diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that must have been just a dream for you because, like you said, you stayed in this. And I was reading too. So your mom was a safari guide, right? That was part of the business that you ran, and she was one of the only or the first females to run the safari guide,
and a bush pilot, right?
And a bush pilot.
That's correct. Yeah, she was the first female combo bush pilot and safari guide in Africa, so essentially in the world. And so that was the family business, right? The farm was where we lived, and we did grow crops and things like that. But the actual business was the safari industry. So when I wasn't on the farm, we were in the deep bush, the real bush, where it wasn't just a couple monkeys, but we had lions, ellies, rhinos, you name it, it was there. And as a little boy, I grew up spending time at those safari camps, and I'd be confined to the constraints of the camp because it's not like a little 5-year-old can go running around the deep bush of Africa without getting chewed by something. So I'd be flipping over logs and giving my mother gray hairs when she'd come back because I'd have cobras in my hands or something like that. And she'd be like freaking out, and just realizing that no matter what, she was never going to keep me away from exciting animals.
Oh man, talk about really growing up in you want to talk about the backwoods. That's the way to go. And you followed in that footstep because you were the youngest person to lead an international canoe safari down the Zambezi, right? That was something else that I read that you kind of took that over as well, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So, I don't think there's any official records of that such a thing, but at age 14, I was like a little troublemaker and a ruffian, and I'd spent all my time in the bush learning about animals. And, I think my mom and her business partner who ran the safari business just said, all right, well, let's kind of let him grow up a bit. And they gave me the opportunity to run a canoe safari, which is probably the least dangerous of the incredibly dangerous safaris that my family used to run. And what that was, guiding a group down the Zambezi River. I think it was 4 nights and 5 days, if I remember correctly. Down the Zambezi River, which is full of hippos, lined with crocodiles, and the list goes on. We still have the elephants and the lions and everything else on shore, and you still have to camp on shore every night. So, at age 14, I guided my first safari.
So how many people were on that safari?
Well, it was myself and then one other person from the business who was like our helper, the guy who would build the tents, and he was actually the cook. And then I just had a French couple from Paris. And they were not impressed when they got off their little bush flight, and there was a 14-year-old boy in his khaki shorts standing there with a giant rifle over his shoulder.
Very cool.
Now, I mean, what's that like? What's that experience like for these people when was it mostly, smaller parties that would come? I mean, I would imagine you're not having 20 people, coming down the river with you. What was a typical 4 to 5 day trip like as you went down the river with those people?
All different because, the tented safaris, the walking safaris could be larger groups, but the canoe safaris typically had to be smaller. It's impossible to manage, like, say, 10 canoes on the river because you just can't keep a track of everyone. And if one person drifts into a pod of hippos, that's the end. So you really have to make sure that the groups are smaller. And I think, maybe if my family or one of the PHs had been running the safari, they would have done three groups of guests or, multiple clients. But with me being my first one, they're like, all right, this is a single couple. You can't screw this up too badly. Worst case scenario, only kills 2 people. So I think it was intentional that I was given just a single couple to guide.
Wow. I gotta hear your most memorable story of that time period.
Oh man, I mean the stories go on and on and on. But even on that canoe safari, this Frenchman was like the guy. The wife was lovely, or fiance, whatever she was, but the guy was like very arrogant, very cocky, and had no interest. He was already displeased that a 14-year-old was bossing him around and telling him what to do. So he had no interest in like listening. And so at one point in time, we're drifting down the river. It's beautiful, and we're looking at the lilac-breasted rollers and the beautiful birds in the trees, and there's hippos and crocs and whatnot. And, the whole time I'm telling him, just like, keep your canoe behind mine. You can do literally anything you like as long as you follow me, basically. And I can't remember what happened, but at some point I'm watching something or looking at something, and I look up and he's just shooting past me, going straight towards this bit of shallow water. And I can see up ahead by the footprints and the bubbles that there's a pod of hippo right there. And I start screaming at him. I can't remember his name, but I start yelling at him like, stop, 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 stop. And he like looks back and like shrugs his shoulders and like keeps paddling like he's so tough. And I'm just like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? So I like jump my canoe and I start paddling as fast as I can. And I quickly like manage to cut him off. And as I cut him off, this hippo comes up and hits the underside of my canoe that, if he had kept going would have been him. And it didn't quite get me or anything like that. But if he had approached them at speed, because what hippos do is they don't feel threatened when they can sink under, but when they're in a shallowish area like that where they feel threatened, they'll pop up, and kind of attack from below. And the hippo kind of rocked up and gave me a smack. And fortunately, it wasn't them; it was me that went flying. And and that was because I was sideways and to cut them off. Had they gone in at full speed, I think they would have gone right into the center of the pod of hippos, and that would have been the end. Oh, no. And funnily enough, the Frenchman decided to listen to me after that.
What's funny is you say that this was the least dangerous out of the tours and the guiding that you guys did, but hippopotamuses are one of the most dangerous animals on the planet.
Yeah, they're like the grizzly bears of the...
And they're even more dangerous than that. I mean, they have no fear of anything as far as I know.
They are. They're very dangerous animals. It's because they're skittish, they're very nervous, wary, skittish animals. And I think that's what makes them so dangerous. They're not, grizzly bear is very confident. It can look at you and choose to ignore you and continue on its way. Whereas when a hippo looks at you, it gets, and you guys understand this being animal people, and I'm sure you've seen abused rescues and things that have this kind of nature. Mm-hmm. But when a hippo looks at you, it gets nervous, right? It gets that bit of like jitters, so to speak. Here comes my wolf creature, by the way. And so, the hippos, they get nervous, right? And they start to get this like frantic energy. And unfortunately, the way they respond to that is by using their mass and size to attack. It's not to retreat. Whereas an antelope might retreat when it gets nervous, a hippo is the aggressor when it gets nervous. And they're just very, very nervous, very skittish animals. And the problem is they're so big and so lumbering, yet so silent, you can approach them very quickly and put them in that nervous state. And so they are very, very dangerous. And I don't want to go on and on about the danger because I don't want to discourage anybody from taking a canoe safari or any safari in Southern Africa.
Right.
It's just phenomenal. And times have changed. There's a lot more things safety things in place nowadays. But my family did and still does in some capacity, like walking safaris, canoe safaris, not like get in the Range Rover and drive around the paved roads of Kruger National Park. They did the real thing. Like you fly into the bush, get in a canoe, walk to camp, that kind of thing with the animals in the Zambezi Valley. And it was, I was very lucky to grow up with that.
Man,
incredible.
That is incredible. Talk about then, because you were there, I think I know you were in your teens, and just tell everybody the events that led to, unfortunately, your family got pushed out of your farm. There was something that happened in your teens that you guys had to fly back and move to the States. So what happened there? Because you guys had to leave Africa, right?
Yeah, well, there's a big political upheaval when the president at the time, President Robert Mugabe, was starting to lose his grip of power. And in order to keep control, what he did was basically created racism where otherwise there really wasn't any. He created, kind of a blacks against whites type thing in the media. And it's funny to see some of the stuff that's happened here because there's resemblances of what happened when I was growing up in Africa. But it created this, divisiveness between the races as opposed to the political parties like you see kind of currently going on in the United States. And I don't want to get political, but very President Robert Mugabe created conflict, like I said, where there was none. And what he said was, these terrible white colonialists, and don't get me wrong, they were colonialists many generations ago, but, they said these terrible white colonialists have come here and taken your land and you can go and take it back by any means possible. And that created violence, that created 14-year-olds with AK-47s high on what we called brown to, come in on these incursions. And it created all this conflict. And so long story short, we lost neighbors. There was a lot of people were being murdered and tortured, and we were in like an affluent farming area. So our farm was very desirable, even though it was very small compared to many of our neighbors. And, one day the knock came on the door and it was time to get out. And if we didn't, we would have ended up like the neighbor down the road who was, tortured and murdered. So my mom packed us all up and here we are in California.
Man.
Wow.
I mean, what was that like then to come back? I mean, obviously you didn't have any recollection, I believe, of the States before that. So what is that like getting uprooted really from your home and then to come here? And because I was reading, you had to sort of reacclimate yourself and try and find, that wildlife passion here when you got to California, right?
Very, very much so. Yeah, the culture shock was very real. I had multiple visits to the United States as my dad was an American as a kid. And, in my mind, the whole of the U.S. was like Disneyland, right? It's like all these big lights and these flashing buildings. And, we don't have skyscrapers and Toys R Us and the kind of things that you have here in America, like TV with all the cartoons and all that kind of stuff. So to me, America was all like Disneyland. It was just like this, it was like a giant Toys R Us coming into the United States, which would have been, I think, wonderful if it wasn't for the circumstances. But with the circumstances under which we traveled here, we went from living on this beautiful 200-acre farm, having a safari business, everything I'd ever known my entire life, to living crammed into a one-bedroom apartment in Oakland, California on welfare. So it was quite a shock. And I think that, I was a 14-year-old boy full of testosterone. I played a lot of rugby. I spent all my time in the bush. And I just I guess I got angry. And I'm not really that, especially not today. I'm not a very angry person. I'm a very jovial person. But at the time, I think I was filled with anger and no real outlet for it. So there was just this culture shock where I grew up kind of rough and tumble. If you had a problem with someone, you went outside and sorted it out. And then the second or third day of school, I had a problem with someone and socked them in the face. And then I was in handcuffs, and it was just like, it was things like that were ongoing that, I wasn't a bad kid. I wasn't trying to beat people up or anything like that. It was just this massive culture shock. Like I couldn't carry a gun. I couldn't carry a knife. I couldn't drink alcohol. In Zimbabwe, there's no real drinking age. if you started a fight, like it didn't end at the fight, people would jump you and threaten you with knives and things like that. I grew up old British boarding school, it was like fisticuffs to sort out a problem, and that was the end of the problem. And it just, especially being in Oakland, it was like there were like gangs and like it was crazy. And so there was just a lot of culture shock, a lot of problems for me, and to contribute to everything else my mom had going on, problems for her because of it. So it took a little while to assimilate for sure.
So when you assimilate, when you finally, I think you found it more because when you went to school, you really study a lot of marine biology. You did a lot of work with lizards and reptiles and things like that. So did you make your way to the coast a little bit? Did you get out of Oakland and get to the water, and that was sort of where everything started to click for you? Because that's what it seemed like.
Yeah, spot on, John. So what happened was we lived in Oakland for 6 months, 9 months. I can't even remember anymore. And my mom could just see that things were like spiraling out of control. Like I'd be in fights. There'd be problems. I'd be running around like Tilden National Park, which is like a fancy park in San Francisco, in my khaki shorts, catching newts in the creeks with all these like uppity people in their North Face jackets being like, hey, what is he doing? And, I think my mom could just see there were problems. So she managed to get us out of there and move us into a coastal city, tiny little town called Cayucos, California on the Central Coast. And she's like, there's no trouble to be had here. Nothing could be further from growing up in the bush than a surfer town in California. And she was right. Nothing could be further, but there was still trouble to be had. That being said, I got on with it. I went to a new school, kind of the same sort of pattern started to emerge. And then one day at a garage sale, I picked up a pole spear, which is a spearfishing stick with 3 prongs on the end of it and a rubber band on the back end of it, a hand-powered spear. And I bought it for $1, which at the time was quite a lot of money even for me because I didn't have anything. And borrowed a mask and snorkel from someone and jumped in the ocean to try and hunt some fish to eat. And it was like I had this sort of, I guess, come to Jesus moment, if you will, like this revelation. Like all of a sudden I had no more anger, no more frustration, no more worries about culture shock, nothing. I just I found wild again. I found the bush. The coast of Central California is wild. There's sea lions and elephant seals and otters and harbor seals and great white sharks and giant Pacific octopus. And the list of fish goes on for days. I mean, it's really, really wild. It's not like above land and above the waterline in California, which is, pretty tame. Like, yeah, we have a couple mountain lions and a bear here and there, but it doesn't compare to Africa. But as soon as you dive into the ocean here, it does. It compares to Africa in the sense of just being this absolutely wild, incredible ecosystem where you never know what you're going to see around the next turn. And I kind of felt at home in that situation and became obsessed with it, became totally obsessed with it. And that was kind of my meditation, if you will. So I started free diving and spearfishing and, still doing things I used to do as a kid. I had 14 terrariums in my bedroom growing up in Zimbabwe. And then when I moved to California, all new species, right? They're all new snakes and lizards, and we don't have rattlesnakes in Africa. So those were super cool. And I was off catching those things. So, I found my bit of nature here in the United States and eventually went to university to study that on academic level. If I always had a clear path as a boy. I'd grow up, I'd be a safari guide, I'd stay in the bush. Well, when you come to California, there's no safari guides in California, not real ones. So, I found another path by which to stay close to wildlife, and that was to become an academic biologist. Now, I'm no longer an academic biologist, but that was the next trend.
Man, it seems like that transition from land to sea for you was just very easy. I mean, once you figured it out, it seemed like you transferred everything that you learned in the bush and on land in Africa right to the Pacific Ocean, and it was a smooth transition for you.
Smooth, yes, in the sense of I found a passion and I found a calling, but it was a slow and lengthy period, and what I mean by that is you don't pick up a mask and snorkel and a pole spear and become proficient in the ocean that day. It's just like you don't walk into Wolf Connection and connect with all the animals that day and understand their body language and their behavior, right? It's the same thing. So it was a very slow process, but I'm a very obsessive person, and when I like something, I go all out on it, and I fell in love with this. So I picked up better and better wetsuits. I started to make a name for myself in the spearfishing world because I was getting these huge fish with this rudimentary gear and breaking free dive records and things like that. And then then I got sponsors. So now I had cool, fancy gear. So, it was a slow process. It wasn't like a week. Like I started this at age 14 or 15 maybe. And, it wasn't until I was in my late teens, early 20s that I was like this notable person in that industry. And at that time, I was already in university and studying the field as well. So I would learn about the fish in class, right? And then everybody else would go home and fucking Netflix and chill or something. And I'd go jump in the ocean and look for that thing I just learned about. So it just kind of that obsession and that passion just kept evolving and kept pushing me forward.
Yeah. And your mind's wired differently that way because you grew up. That you growing up the way that you did, obviously you're like, I need to know, see, touch, feel, and see what this animal is all about. And so I can get the data that way instead of reading or learning it that way.
100%. I say this on my show all the time. The greatest scientists are those that have observational data. It's like if I come to the Wolf Connection and tell you guys about wolves because I've read something in a book, right? Sure, I might have a better literary or academic knowledge, but the animals, right? Nothing I can ever tell you that I have read is going to be the same as the days in and days out that you have spent observing these creatures. And it's a pity because there has become a very, very real divide in the sciences where people on my side of that equation, people that like read and think they know more, think that they're better than the observational scientists or the people that live and breathe these creatures every day, all day long, because they don't have a formal education. In my opinion, it's not true at all. Like I will never, ever, like if I got a PhD in wolf behavior tomorrow, I still think you guys would know more about wolves than I ever will because you see them every single day of your lives. And I stand by that. What you're right, my brain is wired differently in the sense of I come from your guys' side of the equation where I grew up around it, inundated with it, obsessed with behavior, interaction, observational data, and then I got the academic education. So I've just really tried to pair them together. Obviously, you can't be an expert in every single species on the planet, right? It's not possible, but I certainly was wired to learn about the animals in the ocean from an observational standpoint and the animals on land as well as from an academic one. And I think that's what has made me such a good, well-rounded biologist.
So how did Extinct or Alive get started? Because this, first of all, I love the concept and I love what the show is all about because it's, just go on to how it got started. Was it your idea? Did you, how did it go?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got through university, I got degrees in biology with special emphasis in marine biology, as we just discussed, also in herpetology, which is reptiles and amphibians. And then I started working as a biologist. So I would work here in Santa Barbara where I live, out on the California Channel Islands. I worked on everything you can imagine, from weeds to ants to rodents to rattlesnakes to foxes, you name it. And it was great because I was outside, I was working with wildlife. It wasn't walking in the bush with elephants, but it was spending my days outside working with wildlife, which is what I always really wanted to do no matter what. Then, funny story, one day I came home from the California Channel Islands. I was on a 3-month-long project, terrible contract, counting ants. I mean, terrible. Invasive Argentine ants, talk like 200. You're sitting there with a clicker going, 187,000, 187 and 1,000. The list goes on. It's brutal work. But I come home, plop down on the couch. I was like still in my overalls, filthy dirty from digging up ant nests on the Channel Islands. Plop down on the couch, exhausted. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, says to me, she's like, look at this stupid thing. And I'm like, what is this? And it's a show called Naked and Afraid on television, right? And I'm like, what is this rubbish? And I didn't even get through the episode. I thought it was such nonsense. And it's the show where 2 people get dumped in the middle of the woods, naked with nothing, no tools, nothing. And the question is, can they survive for 21 days? And I looked at it and laughed and thought, wow, that's absolutely hilarious. And Jessica turns to me and she says, I've been out with you for longer periods than that. I've seen you make fires in half this time, build blinds and shelters, all just for fun to try and find animals. And these people are doing it and whinging and crying about it like it's so difficult. Why don't you do it? And at the time, I had no money. I was making $14 an hour as a biological tech, counting ants and all that shit. And so I was like, yeah, why not? So I sent one cocky email to the production company that made Naked and Afraid. I never filled out a casting application, nothing. I literally just sent in an email and was like, I've seen your show. it's great, but I can do a lot better. Like these people that you're calling expert survivalists are pretty useless. Like they have no actual experience. And so they wrote back and, basically said, prove it. 10 days later, I was on a plane to Panama. I went and what I would call had a vacation for 21 days on the Panamanian jungle, which was an absolute delight. I ate myself sick on oysters. I found hundreds of pounds of yucca, a wild root vegetable. I made a spear and went spear fishing. I mean, it was a treat. It was like a vacation. I loved it. I had so much fun. I was smiling and laughing the whole time. Producers kept rolling their eyes, telling me it was a disaster because, that's not what the show's about. Like, you're not struggling enough. And I'm like, sorry, this is fun. And I came home, went back to being a biologist. Like, that was fun. That was my vacation. Didn't even think about it. 9 months later, the show came out, right? Well, the show was a massive hit. It was a huge success. It was a smash. Like, 4.5 million people tuned in to see this naked African kid running around the jungle spearing fish. And anyway, long story short, that I got my 5 minutes of fame that everybody of the 300 plus participants that have done Naked and Afraid get. The reporters call you and say, how was it? Did it suck? Was it awful? Was it terrible? Did you love it? And I just say, no, thanks. I'm not interested in talking about that. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, it was fun. That was a vacation for me. It's really not important. And they're like, oh, well, what do you want to talk about? And I was like, well, I could tell you about the wildlife work I'm doing. I could tell you about restoring habitat for Channel Island foxes, or how, white sea bass are their numbers are improving because of the wonderful work by California Fish and Game. I'll talk about things that are important. I'm not going to sit here and talk about me running around, dangling my dick out in the jungles of Panama. And most of them just hung up, and half of them were like, all right, tell us a story, I guess. So I started telling them stories and sharing images. And a couple of these stories went massively viral, like bigger than Naked and Afraid viral, like cover of the Daily Mail and all these things, man bitten by hammerhead shark in California Channel Islands where they're not supposed to be. Man catches biggest lobster in North America, like silly things that were true, but, I'd never tried to promote them. They were just things I'd done as a biologist. Anyway, as these stories went viral, people started to contact me and say, well, this is really interesting. I didn't know you did all this rare animal work. And I was like, yeah, this is my job. I'm a biologist, and a high risk one at that. I like doing the fun stuff that gets the old heart beating. And, this is a very long-winded story, but eventually I got hooked up with a young guy who was a producer, who had worked on Whale Wars, the conservation show about the sea shepherd whale wars. And he had never created a TV show before, but he really wanted to. And he said, hey man, why don't we partner up and try and create a TV show? Like, what do you want to do? I'm like, I want to work with critically endangered, edge of extinction type stuff, things that are really, really need the exposure and need the attention, and not necessarily, rhinos and panda bears because everybody knows them, but the stuff that people aren't really looking at. And he's like, well, that's not that sexy. What if it's extinct animals that might still be there? And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I know for a fact that some of these animals could potentially still be out there. Just because some stuffy guy in an office in a British smoking jacket says they're no longer here doesn't necessarily mean he's right. Mm-hmm. And so we developed this idea for Extinct or Alive, and to Patrick, my partner's credit, was really more his idea than mine. And then we took it out, we pitched it, we found a partner in a production company named Hot Snakes Media, based out of New York. Like, this all took years. This whole time I was just a biologist. I was just back to work, but my side hustle, so to speak, was this like fantasy dream of hosting this adventure travel wildlife show on Animal Planet where Steve Irwin was. This will never happen, but you never know, kind of thing. So I was working my day job as a biologist, and then I'd come home and crank some emails at night, or on the weekends I'd drive to LA for a meeting, or fly to New York to try and discuss. And it took like a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And eventually the first place that we pitched it that said maybe came back around and said, sure, we'll do a pilot. Now, everybody else said no, but Animal Planet said, we'll do a pilot. And I was like, holy shit, like, I'm going to go make a show about conservation? This is insane. Like, I can't believe this, all of this because I talked about a lobster I caught in 2012. Like, this is nuts. And I was like blown away. And we went and made a special on the Tasmanian tiger in Tasmania for Animal Planet's Monster Week, which was kind of like their answer to Shark Week back then. And it was the hit. It did super well, just as well as my Naked and Afraid show did, blah, blah, blah. And, I think only like 1 in 100 pilots go to series or something like that. But the show did really well because we told an honest message about conservation. We talked about this animal that might still be here, but as far as we know, isn't still here. We caught Tasmanian devils on camera and quolls, and talked about habitat destruction in Tasmania and blah, blah, blah. All the stuff I wanted to talk about, like all the important stuff. And that materialized into being a series. And here we are 4 or 5 years after that.
It's a fascinating idea too. I've heard of it happening before too, which is just unbelievable how many scientists are sure that something's extinct and then a farmer catches one, his dog catches one in the backyard or something. I think I heard about that with a weasel or something.
It's become popular, like when we first started pitching it, like I compare myself to Percy Fitzpatrick, the guy from The Lost City of Z, when he stands up in front of the room of stuffy British scientists and he's like, I'm going to find the lost city. And they're like, you're insane. It was like that when I first started pitching this to like colleagues and other scientists that I had through, my various work. And they're like, you're crazy. Like, what a waste of time. Except now we found 8 different animals that were lost to science. And now it's a whole field. Like GWC, Global Wildlife Conservation, has like the Search for the Lost Species campaign. Leonardo DiCaprio posts about my finds. There's like all these pop-up organizations that are looking for lost species. None of this existed when I started. It's like created this kind of revolution with the idea behind like hope, and the hope that these things could still be hanging on by a thread. And if we can find them, then hopefully we can bring them back from the edge of extinction. And it's created an entire industry. And of course, this is something I never ever expected. I never even expected to find one, let alone 8. But, it's evolved into this like pretty big thing. There's books on it now, all kinds of stuff. And it's really cool. It's like a whole new field of conservation that we created.
So when you find a species, does it follow up with a genuine initiative, like by a wildlife agency to assist that animal?
That's always the goal. But it's all over the map. It's not like me sitting here in my office in Santa Barbara can manage the ongoing survival of a leopard in Zanzibar, right? Like there's nothing I can do that can really contribute to that. So, the way I try and describe it is I'm the mercenary, right? I'm the hide and seek champ that you call in to go look for the thing. Right. And then I turn it over to whatever government bodies, local organizations, et cetera, can work to preserve the species. Some of them have been huge. We raised tons and tons of money for the Galapagos tortoise that we found. There have been multiple return expeditions. They've got her in captivity in a breeding program. Some of them have been massive. Others have been smaller, next to nothing. In Sri Lanka, they're trying to extend the national park by 3 miles into the ocean because of the lost shark species we found. There's been some big ramifications, but ultimately, like, I'm not trying to, parachute in and be like, thump my chest and be like, I'm the guy, I found it and then leave, because that doesn't do any good for conservation. I come in, I collaborate with local on-the-ground scientists, farmers, villagers, fishermen. It really doesn't matter who they are, but people, like we said, those observational people that could have potentially seen the species, try and track it down, try and get proof, and then turn that over to the local governing body or organization that can then manage the ongoing survival of that species. So I really am just the gun for hire in the sense of go find it. And I'm very lucky because, that obsessive passion that I spoke about, that upbringing in Zimbabwe, but in Southern Africa, that ability to track wildlife that I learned from my family as a safari guide, that the academic well-roundedness that I have from going to school, like all those things kind of perfectly mash up, which I never knew, of course, going into this, to help me finding these really, 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 really hard to find animals, and it's been successful.
Yeah, I mean that's the best part. Is I love what Steven said, and you were saying before, is that you're just the fact that these animals are now getting the attention that they really deserve, because, like you said, from the observational standpoint, and there's so many species out there, like you say, that the ocean is massive. I mean, land, I feel like if you're looking for an animal that's maybe on land, it's a little bit easier, but you finding some of these species in the ocean, I mean, there's miles and miles and miles.
There's probably animals that have gone extinct in the ocean that we never knew existed in the first place.
It's crazy. I mean, just to give them the observation and to give them the platform. I mean, you give them the platform for that, right? I mean, did you ever, like you said, you didn't see this coming?
No, I never knew that any of this would go to where it is. I mean, the ocean is huge. Literally last week, they discovered a new species of whale off the coast of Mexico near the San Benito Islands, and that's a new species of whale. Like, we're not talking about an ant or a cockroach, or a lizard. We're talking about a freaking whale. So, it's a big place. There's a lot of places to hide. And I always wanted to work with, from a selfish standpoint, I always wanted to spend time outdoors, adventure, explore, and work with wildlife. I left academia behind completely to, pursue promoting conservation in media, but I never knew that it would have the massive impact that it's had. I mean, I get several hundred messages per day on my social media and website that say, because of you, because of your show, because of your book, whatever it might be, I have switched my career. I have changed my major in college. I am volunteering at a wildlife organization for the first time, whatever it might be. And that to me is the biggest impact, right? It's not even the finds of these animals, which is great. And I love that I'm finding them and it's important. But it's the fact that we're reaching millions and millions of people across the globe and inspiring some small percentage of them to care and contribute to conservation. And that to me is what's super important.
I want to ask too about this because you were here at Wolf Connection, and I believe you were doing an episode where you were looking for, I don't know if it was a lost canid species or a lost wolf species, right? Because I don't know if that's how you got hooked up with us initially. How did you get here? Because I know there was, I don't know if there was a partnership before that or that was the first time you had come on the property.
No, that was the first time. My line producer, Steve, found you guys. And the reason being we were looking for the Southern Rocky Mountain wolf subspecies, which had been hunted to extinction, don't quote me on this, 70-ish years ago. And in order to find an extinct subspecies, you need to try and identify what that subspecies is and what it looks like. And in order to do that, what I wanted to do was try and find an animal that had similar physical characteristics to the Southern Rocky Mountain wolf. As you guys know, like the animals that you have, wolves in general, some are black, some are white, some are beige, some are big, some weigh 120 pounds, some weigh 60 pounds. You just don't know. So what I was trying to do was take all of the historical data, observational data of the Southern Rocky Mountain wolf species and compare that with an animal that you guys had on your facility. Now, unfortunately, I don't remember the animal's name, but we did find one that was a very, very close match, aesthetically speaking, to what a Southern Rocky Mountain wolf looked like. So we took some hair from her, I can't remember her name anymore, and had it analyzed to try and figure out what amount of deviation there was from, pure gray wolf, to try and identify some genomes in the Southern Rocky Mountain wolf. And then if we could compare those genes with something that we could find out in the wild, we might be able to say the objective was not, oh, look, there's a Southern Rocky Mountain wolf, because the odds of that were very slim. But maybe through some coy wolves or maybe through some hybrids, there's still a little bit of that DNA pool floating around, right? Because we all know, dogs, wolves, coyotes, they can all interbreed. Wolf subspecies can interbreed when they cross range. So the idea was to try and find some genetics for that animal. We did find a coy wolf. We weren't able to get genetics from it. Unfortunately, it was it wasn't a loss, but it wasn't exactly a home run like some of the other ones are. Regardless, that's how I came to find you guys. And then when I got there and saw all the incredible animals, I met you guys, it was such a great atmosphere. And I love everything that you do and what you stand for, that, we've maintained this relationship ever since. I've been back 3 or 4 times and it's great. I think it's amazing what you guys do.
No, I think I remember, I don't know if it was, I know we have pictures of you with Coda. I don't know if that was the one that you were in there with, but he was the male. He came from Alaska with his brother Chance. So I think
there's a female too.
I'm trying.
He said it was a female. I wonder what she looked like. Do you remember what color she was? Because we don't have that many. I mean, most of them are white.
She was beige, like the Rocky Mountain.
Oh, that might have been Nolly, or Nora.
Ooh, might have been Nolly. That sounds very familiar.
She's a coy
I'm sorry,
wolf.
I don't remember her name.
No, it's okay.
This is her. Sorry, I don't know. Sorry, I know this is an audio recording, but can you tell who that is?
That's Coda.
That's Coda. Yeah,
he's the male.
That's the male. Yeah,
Coda. So, okay, it was a male. I apologize.
No big deal. Yeah,
it's okay.
Yeah, so it was Coda, and just the bridge of the snout, the way the ears are positioned on the head, the coat coloration in specific. There were a lot of things that Coda expressed that were very similar to all of the historical reports of the Southern Rocky Mountain wolf. Now, whether or not he has any Southern Rocky Mountain wolf in him, we don't really know. But it was the best thing that I had to go off of at the time.
Wow.
Now, go for it.
No,
are you doing this kind of research before you find any species, or how do you start the process of locating a species that people don't think is there?
Some of them are easier than others in the sense of, finding a subspecies of a wolf in a country where we still have wild wolves and they've hybridized with coyotes and dogs is much harder than say finding a leopard in a place where there's no other species of leopard, right? At least genetically speaking. So it's very, very different. But every single show, every single expedition that we do is the culmination of years of research, months of preparation, and then weeks in the field. And what that boils down to is I have this gargantuan Excel spreadsheet, and any single time I get any kind of a hit, meaning like, hey, if they're not saying I saw Bigfoot, but if they're like, hey, I think I saw a black panther, I think I saw a leopard, I think this caiman might exist, et cetera, I put it into this Excel spreadsheet, and the list goes on and on and on. And it's really, really lengthy. And then what I try and do is cross-reference all those data points on a map to say, because I talk to people, I'm like, where did you see it? What is it that you saw? And then I start looking at a variety of factors, right? When did the animal go extinct? Who declared it extinct? Why did it go extinct? Is there still enough habitat there? Is there ample, food or prey or water sources, et cetera, et cetera? And once I go through this long checklist of variables, if enough of them line up, okay, well, the animal was last seen in the 60s. No Western scientist has been there since. The locals still say it's there. There's plenty of wild habitat. Prey species are disappearing or getting mangled, et cetera. If it starts checking all those checkpoints, then we launch an expedition. So it's a real lengthy process. I often make the joke that it's probably a little bit harder to make our show than it is to film Kim Kardashian texting at a hair salon, because we really put a lot of time and effort into figuring out what these expeditions are going to look like, getting scientific permits, getting access. I mean, just like coming to you guys, like we just came to you to take a fur clipping from an animal, right? Like it just because it might or might not have some DNA that works,
right,
that resembles it. So it's like there's a lot of moving parts that go into these expeditions.
Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, when you found one of those 8 species, I mean, what is that feeling for you and your team? Because I mean, it's a collective effort, obviously. What is it like when you find that species and you put like you said, all these data points, all this work in? What is that? What's that feel like when you find that species?
I have never experienced a greater feeling in my entire life. I mean, it's just, I'm fortunate enough to have had it a couple different times now, but the first, second, third time that it happened, and the harder you have to work for it, it is impossible for me to articulate how overexciting, over-emotional, over-stimulating it is. Like, I'm a scientist, right? By education, by training, I'm a scientist. So I'm trained to not be over-emotional, not be over-passionate. It's like very in-the-box thinking as a scientist. And I literally break down. Like one of them I was in tears. My wife's never seen me cry. Like one of them I was in tears for. One of them I just couldn't stop screaming. Like I was just screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming for no apparent reason. Like I like black out and lose control, because it's like, it's like being Indiana Jones and finding that crystal skull or whatever he's looking for, except the entire world says that this animal doesn't exist. And the difference is I don't get rich off of it. I don't get to put it in a museum. I get to save an entire species, which is, for me, it's like, it's my entire purpose in life. So it's to see a man's entire life's dream and work come to fruition in like an 8-second period it's a lot. It's a lot going on.
Wow. And why do you think, what can you credit, to your own personality or even just your team's efficiency? Like, why do you think that there's been so many scientists that agree that something's extinct, but they don't put in that extra effort to find out, or what's keeping other professionals from discovering what you've been able to discover?
Well, as I said, it's starting to become a thing now, but up until recently and until today, it's the hardship of getting that done. The reason that people aren't seeing these animals, or they're missing, or they're disappearing, isn't because people aren't trying, or isn't because they're not there. It's because it's really fucking hard to go to some of these places and to live in a hammock or a tent for 3 weeks in the Amazonian rainy season, or whatever it might be. And so, I think the reason that my team and I have been so successful is like our tenacity. I don't have any quitters on my team. And I went through quite a few guys in the beginning because, we'll extend expeditions all the time. Like we'll leave with the plan of being gone for 2 weeks and we're gone for 2 months all the time because we're hot on the trail or we believe we're going to do it or whatever. And this is for 48 minutes of television, like it's crazy how long we spend in the field sometimes, but it's just this passion and this motivation And I've been very lucky to be surrounded now by a team of guys that share that passion. They share that desire. They share that motivation. They have their own specialties. Mine's finding the animals. Some of those is camera work. Some of them is audio work, et cetera. But the point is, like, we are willing to go further. We are willing to do harder things. Like, I remember in Madagascar, my entire team got dysentery. We were literally puking and shitting all over ourselves for like 3 weeks straight. And, like dehydrated, like you're just trying to get a little bit of liquid down, and you have to continue this march every day to get further and further into this habitat. And people are lying on the trail, pooping their pants. I'm not exaggerating. None of that makes it to TV because it's not TV friendly. But that's where anybody else would have turned around and said, like, we can't go any further. We can't do it. We got to get to a hospital, whatever. We just march on, where we should be doing 6 miles a day. We ended up doing 1.5 because everybody's lying on the ground. But it's like we just push through it. And we've done that time and time again. And we've been rewarded for it.
Wow. That's incredible. So to come back here. So when you first got here to Wolf Connection and you did that episode, and then, so what made you want to come back? Because you've come back 3 or 4 times, and every time, now that I know your background a little bit more, I see that 14-year-old, when you come on the property, you are constantly smiling. You have this like just beautiful aura with the animals, and it's, I can see the excitement. So what's that thing that keeps you coming back, and what, you know what I mean? So what makes you want to come back and witness, the wolves and the wolf dogs that we have here?
Well, I said it before, and I'll say it again. You guys run a phenomenal facility. I mean, it's just really wonderful. Like, taking science out of it completely. Sometimes you can just tell when an animal's happy or when an animal's miserable. I mean, I'm sure you guys can understand that. You can, like you talked about auras. I feel like I can read the energy of animals better than most people. Probably not better than you guys with your animals, but better than most people. I can tell when I come to the Wolf Connections that some of those animals come from very difficult backgrounds. I mean, you can tell straight away. And yet, they're all happy, or they're all in the best shape that they can possibly be. And there's a wonderful energy there. And I'm surrounded by like-minded people like you guys who probably can, not, I don't want to be insulting, but can probably understand wildlife and animals better than you can people. And, you can see these creatures for what they are. You can understand them. You can read them. You can tell when they're happy. You can tell when they're sad. And then you guys take it a step further, which I really appreciate, which is, for instance, the last time we were there, Kenai didn't want to come out and play, right? You didn't force Kenai to come out. You let Kenai be, you let Kenai make the decision. And I've been to many, many, many different animal places and facilities around the world and around the country, as you can imagine. Not everybody has the wherewithal to, first of all, read that language of that animal, and secondly, read it and let the animal make the decision. A lot of people, I'm reading a book right now called Listening to Whales. They used to train orcas for these marine parks. They would just force the animals to do the behavior, right? Or they would withhold food from them if they didn't want to, or they'd punish them or whatever. They'd assert dominance over them. I haven't seen anyone at the Wolf Connection assert dominance over an animal in a situation in which the animal is, refusing to do something. And it's a wonderful thing. I love it there for that reason. Further to that, you guys do the great work that you do connecting people with animals. You rescue these creatures. They're not animals brought in from the wild, like a marine park or something shitty like that. It's like it checks every box of like good animal husbandry and behavior and human interaction. And it's wonderful to see. I didn't know we had that here in California. So I really appreciate what you guys do.
No, we appreciate the kind words, and it's just great to see how the bonds develop. And like you said, you brought a group out, goodness, had to be probably a month or so ago. And what's that like for you when you bring a group out that's that's learning about a wolf or something? It could be any animal, but in this case it was wolves. What is it like when you see someone starting to learn about an animal and their story and where they're coming from? Do you see sort of those perceptions change at all in a positive way? I'm sure you see it on your show, but like when you brought out that group a month or so ago, what are some of the reactions that you get when it's more of that education and, showing what these animals are all about?
Well, one of the things that I love, I don't care if you're a big game hunter or you're, the world's greatest conservationist or something in between. I don't care what you are. if you're willing to take the time to attempt to connect with wildlife, an animal, whatever it may be, that helps you it helps you as a human being, because first of all, I believe it's instinctual. But secondly, it just helps you understand the ecosystem, and it helps you care about things, right? I made this analogy. And by the way, like, I hunt. I'm a spear fisherman, right? I have 6 world records in it. So I'm not bagging on hunters. But when you're the guy that lives in the city, and then once a year you drive 6 hours to your deer blind, and then you blast the deer in the head, and then you drive home and you hang your deer on the wall and eat the meat, good for you. Like, I'm not judging it. But you have no connection to that animal, right? You don't see it in its environment. You don't see it on a daily basis. You don't see it go through spring or fall or winter or reproduce or hardship, etc. But when you take the time to go out there and connect with that creature, then you understand its place in the ecosystem. You understand whether or not it should go into the crock pot or whether it should be left alone. You know, whether you develop a bond with it and an understanding of it, and you see its ups and downs. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying that when I bring out a group like I did a month ago, straight away you see people's preconceived notions disappear. You know, you see them begin to connect with an animal. You see them begin to show compassion for it. You see them begin to understand it. Some people, and even in that group we had a month ago, are completely disinterested, and they will remain disinterested, and that's fine. But before we got there, they were all oblivious, right? Let's say there was a group of 15 of them. I don't remember how many it was. There's a group of 15 of them. Before we got there, they were all disinterested and they were all oblivious, right? Yeah, I like wolves. I've seen them in a movie or whatever. But by the time we left, even if only 5 of them now had a passion for the compassion of those animals, for the nature of those animals, for those understanding, and all of us on this podcast have accomplished everything we need to do, right? Because it's opened the doors and opened the eyes to an animal-human connection that wasn't there before, that I think is very instinctual, that I think our modern society is strongly lacking. And that's wonderful for me. It's not about the other 10 that didn't really care, or they got their Instagram photo or whatever happened, right? It's about those 5 that you can see in their faces. They care. They're interested. They connected. You know, it changed them. Even if it's in a minor way, it changed them a little bit. It opened their minds a little bit. And that's what makes me happy. You know, it's not just that I get to interact with your incredible animals, which I love and I'm selfishly always coming back for, but it's the fact that that handful of people also got that feeling and that experience, and they'll take that with them moving forward. So that's why I love coming back and seeing it.
Is there a particular wolf that you connect with? I know, like I said, you met Coda the first time around. Is there any wolf that since you've been coming back, that you've sort of drawn to?
Yeah, I'm very drawn to Kenai, and I think it's because of his aloof nature. You know, sometimes and maybe you guys have experienced him in a different light, but of the 4 times I think I've been there now, I've only been able to interact with him once, and there's something going on there. There's something very deep-rooted behind those eyes that, you know, I'm connected to and I want to understand more of. I'm sure you guys know the backstory. I don't recall what his backstory is, but there's just, excuse me, I just think he's a phenomenal animal and I'd like to connect more with him, but it's, you know, on his terms. So I have to keep coming back.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know you were mentioning when we brought that group out, Jax, Jax, who was one of our yearlings, you were really looking at the physical characteristics of him because you were describing it to the group about the snout and how he really embodied sort of that wolf physicality. I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on him, because I know that just stood out to me. I was handling him that day, so I just remember you saying that to the group.
Yeah, and I actually remember that wolf very, very well. And I just thought that, you know, you guys have a variety of different animals, some from very pure wolf to mostly dog. And I remember looking at Jax's behavior and looking at his physical traits and thinking, this is an animal that's very closely related to, you know, the ones that are running around in the wild. Like I you know, you guys rescue wolf dog hybrids, right? People that think, oh, I'm going to put a wolf on my sofa. Jax to me wasn't that animal, right? Jax to me was that animal that could be out there taking down elk at the head of a herd right now, and ahead of a pack. And it was amazing to sit and interact with him and watch him because, you know, he's still very understanding and gentle and all the things that a lot of your animals are. But he just, to me, and I'd love to hear your guys' input on this, he didn't belong in the wolf dog category. He belonged out there, out there roaming around Yellowstone, killing elk or whatever he should be doing.
Yeah. We get, there are a couple, Steven's taken a huge liking to Jax. When he first got here, I think he was 3 or 4 months old. And just to see that transformation, both physically and personality wise, you can see he's got that different behavior. He's got that, there is that aloofness. But what I love about him, and Steven, you could probably speak to it also, is that he loves the interaction and the play. When it's mostly pack care members and we're here and we're scooping poop and we're fixing his water, it's almost like he has a permagrin on his face where he wants the interaction, he wants the physicality. And he embodies all of that. It's really, really great.
No, he came here as like a little wriggly coyote looking thing. And then all of a sudden he just became this perfect example of a wolf. His face, his eyes, his nose, he's just one of the most beautiful animals. He's my phone background now, actually, from the day you guys came. Yeah. He's so beautiful. He does love interaction. We have to go in as a team just to sort of dissuade him from being playful because it's not really the relationship we want to, foster all the time with them when we're scooping and we're kind of doing work. But I can't help it. Every time I go in there, I just love interacting with him. He's so ready to just be in the moment with someone doing something.
And each animal, I did it myself, right? We tend to lump animals in. I said earlier, hippos are nervous and skittish, right? Mm-hmm. Generally they are. But each animal is different. Each individual has their own personality, right? I think a lot of people, they go, oh, wolves are mean, or oh, wolves are tough, or oh, wolves are shy, or whatever, right? Here's a perfect example of a wolf that's playful, and that's his personality. And I think people often, myself included, just tend to lump them all into one kind of category and forget that on an individual level, especially with, high intelligent beings like wolves, they're all different. They all have different personality types. Some are shitty, some are just like you meet a grumpy guy at the gas station, right? Some are grumpy as hell and some are super sweet and friendly. And you really see that at Wolf Connection. Like you see all the different personalities of the animals, not just when they're out, but when they're in their pens and everything else. You can see who's playful, who's happy, who's being shitty that day. Like you can totally read it when you have that kind of understanding. And it's great to see them being themselves.
Yeah, I think that speaks to what you were saying before, which is there's a difference between someone who knows animals from an academic level and someone who knows them from an observational level. Because when you know something about a subject and it's purely academic, you'll see the animal as a species more than you will as an individual. And then when you kind of have that observational, experience, you see them as individuals, which I think both perspectives are probably helpful to understanding, the whole animal.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm sure you get that too when you're not just, when you're going out and you get that, like you were saying before, that visceral connection with a species that you find. So now there's some sort of bond there now that you have because of the effort and the work that you put in to learn about this species. And it's not just, like you said, reading through a textbook or anything like that. Not poo-pooing the educational side of it. It's just, like you said, the observational point is that you're putting in the physical effort.
Yeah, there's got to be a marriage to both of the studies.
Yeah, both are important in the way that education has become in today's society. Like we specialize so much in something, right? Like I'm a mathematician. All I do is crunch numbers. I'm a biologist. All I do is read textbooks. I'm a field worker. All I do is work in the field. Like we specialize so much in the way our society views expertise in education that we've lost a lot of that. Like, hey, I'm an academic biologist, but I'm also someone who goes out there and works with them, right? Like I do both. And there's a lot of different fields. I can only speak to biology because that's my field. There's a lot of different fields like that where we specialize so much. Like we read so much, we study so much, we're so much in the textbooks. We forget that the thing we're reading about is the living world, and we have to get out there and experience it if we actually want to understand it. And it's, I see it every day. And I think, again, one of the great things about my show and what I do and what you guys do is it brings people physically into that world. It allows them to come in and do that and take a break from seeing it on a screen or reading it in a book.
Yeah, it's a totally different interaction and experience when you're physically close enough or even viewing it through a scope and realizing that, wow, this animal is existing in its either natural habitat in the wild or even through an enclosure out on leash, understanding how this animal operates. And I think that's such a different level of understanding, like you were saying, which is a totally different way. A couple more things just before we let you go. What do you see? I mean, you've done such a great job with your show, and again, thank you for spending time with us and going through. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the future of Extinct or Alive, and what do you feel like the future is, and do you think you feel the conservation efforts that you're doing are pushing things in the right direction? That you're hitting, like you said, enough young people, that people are watching the show for all the right reasons and getting into the sciences, whether it be, to be in a conservation or not?
Yeah, I think the show has done a wonderful job of that. This year, 2020, we've effectively been shut down. I made a couple productions this year, but with COVID, you can't travel anywhere. It's not responsible to travel many places that you can.
Yeah,
but I think what the future holds for me is expansion. And what I mean by that is Extinct or Alive, I love it. I absolutely love it. I would do it forever if I could. But it's very niche and it's very black and white, right? Is it extinct? Isn't it extinct? And that's great. Don't get me wrong. And like you've said, it's inspired a lot of people. It certainly sends the right message. But I'd love to kind of branch out from that. Look at these unexplored habitats. Look at these uncategorized species. Look at this place in the world where we have no valuable scientific data from. How do we expand that black and white, is it extinct, isn't it, into a bigger picture, into David Attenborough does natural history, not so much like hosted stuff, but he encompasses the whole planet, from seas to mountaintops to critically endangered species to things that are just pretty to look at. He covers the whole umbrella. And I would like to, if I stop doing Extinct or Alive tomorrow, I've gone out on top. Like, we've done a great job. We found a bunch of extinct animals. It's inspired lots of people. How can I keep that momentum, so that people don't go, yeah, I've seen, like, I don't want to bag on anyone, but like river monsters, right? Yeah, I've seen Jeremy Wade catch 100 different big fish, right? Like, I'm not going to watch season 5 or whatever. I'd like to, because that's what he does. He catches a big fish, right? And so, like, I'd like to expand that so that the people that follow me, that enjoy what I do and appreciate the wildlife and the sciences, can go, cool, I saw him, find these extinct animals. Now he's out there finding these undocumented places or these new species or whatever. It's like just kind of expanding so that people's minds can continue to grow along with me as well about like our natural world and conserving it. So that's ultimately like my big picture goal. And I've never discussed this publicly before, but that's what I intend to do, is to just kind of keep branching out and make the world a bigger place, not so black and white, not so small and niche as Extinct or Alive. Is it there? Isn't it there? And I don't know what form that'll take yet, but that's what I'd like to try and do.
Yeah, I mean that's great. I mean, all the work that you've done obviously is, I commend it. I love it. I love the conservation aspect of it and everything else. The one last thing that we'll ask you before we let you go, and I want to promote the show, I want to promote your social, everything like that, is when you hear the word wolf, what's something that comes to your mind?
Honestly, at this point in time, you guys are the first thing that comes. I swear to God, Wolf Connection is the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear the word wolf. So I've seen wolves in the wild, right? I've seen them from very far away, 300 yards, 200 yards, whatever. But I've never, until coming to you guys, been able to see one 5 feet away, been able to interact with one, been able to depict characteristics of different individuals and behaviors. Like, my entire physical education of wolves is thanks to you at the Wolf Connection. So when someone says the word wolf to me, the first thing I respond to them is, have you been to the Wolf Connection? Have you met a wolf? Have you connected with one? And so I'm not saying that to plug you guys or anything else. I'm being dead honest. You are the first thing I think of when I think about wolves, because it's the first place I have had a physical and emotional connection to one of these animals.
Love it. That's the first one that we've heard of that.
Yeah, Forrest, thank you for that. That's great. Yeah, I mean, we're glad to have that impact on you as an individual who's been around the world, and for you to have that reaction is wonderful, and we can't thank you for that enough. Please plug. All right, so first of all, we'll go down. So Extinct or Alive, where what's the status of production? What season would you be in? What's the status of Extinct or Alive, first off? Where can people find it?
Yeah, so Extinct or Alive has certainly been slowed down this year. There is more coming. It's Discovery Plus launches on January 4th. It is a subscription-based Netflix type of streaming service. All of my seasons of Extinct or Alive will be bingeable right there, along with my shark shows, the crocodile rescue shows, everything else I've done. So that's the place to check it out, really, Discovery Plus. Otherwise, if you have cable, you can find it on Animal Planet or Discovery Channel. And just, follow along with what I'm doing on social media. My name is on Facebook, Instagram, I think Twitter. I haven't checked it in many months, but and I'm always trying to expand and continue to bring education and wildlife wonder into the homes of millions.
Yeah. What's your Instagram, so I can plug that too, where people can go and find, because you have some awesome pictures on there.
Oh, thank you. Some of which are from you guys. My Instagram is just at my name with a period in between. So it's at forrest.galante. My Facebook is just Forrest Galante, 2 R's in Forrest. Same for, I think, my Twitter. But yeah, please don't check that out. Never looked at it. And that's where you can find me. And if I'm not there and I'm home and I got nothing to do, you can probably find me at the Wolf Connection.
Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, man. Listen, we cannot wait to have you back up here physically when things die down. Want to have you back up. We can visit the animals again. We can do this in person. We can have have some updates.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, all the best to you and your wife and your little wolf dog at home there for the holidays. Again, thank you so much for your continued support of us.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you for all the work that you're doing, and the education and the conservation is just tremendous. Can't thank you enough for us for doing what you do.
Thank you guys. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you too, man. How's to everybody out there? Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we will talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.